What's going on, guys? Welcome to my channel. Before we start, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and enable the notification to get more videos. Also, let me know in the comments what are the next workshops and topics I should cover and do for you guys. So, in this video or workshop, I will be teaching you how to work with Spring Security and precisely how to work with Spring Authorization. What I mean by this is, for example, imagine that we have a REST resource or a controller, for example, to make it easy for everyone, which has different methods, and we have some specific method that should be only accessible by users having the role admin, for example, or manager, and other endpoints that can be accessible only by users having the role user, and other endpoints, for example, accessible by a user having the role admin or user. So this is what we will be learning in this video, and also we will go through all the steps, like creating the project, configuring Spring Security, and just to mention, we will be working with an in-memory user. Like we will not do an authentication or a database based authentication. We will not be fetching the users from the database. This topic we will be covering in the next videos. So let's get started. First thing, we will start by creating a new Spring project. So as usual, I guess you know it already from my previous video. The way I like to create Spring project is just going to start.spring.io and create my project. So here, let's say it's called .boali. Let's make it workshops here. And for this workshop, let's say authorization, because we'll be covering what is the authorization or how to configure this in deep. So let's keep the rest as it is, and here we will need the dependencies. We will need the Spring Web because we will have resources and controllers to expose. Also, we will need this security, which is the Spring Security. Let's also add the Lombok, and regarding Lombok, don't forget to install the plugin on your IDE, IntelliJ or Eclipse. So here, let's just generate the project, and then let's open our project using our preferred IDE. So our project is ready now. First thing, let me explain few things, what we will be doing exactly in this workshop. So here, what we will be doing is we will configure, as mentioned before, we will configure Spring Security to work with an in-memory database user or users. So when we activate the Spring Security and we want to do or to perform a login operation, we will have a form, or a login form provided by Spring. It's the default form, and also we will be fetching these users from. When the user tries to log in, we will be comparing or fetching the users from our in-memory configuration we will be doing here. Later on, what we will see and what I will mainly explain how to work with this authorization. It's not something complicated, but I guess it's worth mentioning because so many of you have been requesting and asking me to do such tutorial. So let's get started. The first thing, let's create a new class in a config package. Let's call it security configuration or config. So here, to tell Spring Boot that this is a configuration class and you need to scan it at the startup, we need to add this configuration annotation. And then to configure the security, we need to extend the class called Web Security Configure Adapter. So this Web Security Configure Adapter contains many methods, and we need to override some or few of them. So the first one we need to override, let's search for configure. It's the configure method which takes or which asks for as a parameter for an authentication manager builder. So this is the one we need to override, and the role of this method is to provide the authentication manager we want to use for our security in the generally speaking. So for example, in this case, we will be telling Spring, hey, if you need to do some authentication, the authentication manager will be the in-memory user or in-memory authentication management. For example, later on, if we want to do, for example, a database-based authentication, like we need to provide it in a different way. So in this method configure, this is where we precise to Spring how to do the authentication or how to fetch, let's say mainly how to fetch the users to authenticate. So to do this, it's auth.inMemory authentication, and here we have a method, it's called with user. Here it will be the username. Let's just make it easy, admin, and also password admin, and let's give it some roles or a role which will be admin, for example, in this case for the admin user. And like with using this method, and we can also provide other users. So let me make it like that. Okay. And here, let's say with user, let's give it user, and password also user, and roles, let's give it a role user2, or like you can change the roles and so on. So this is our first configuration. So now Spring knows which authentication manager he needs to use. So the next method we need to override is also, it's called configure, but it takes different parameter, which is HTTP security. So for this one, or this method, we will be telling Spring how we want to manage our HTTP security. And for example, we can tell Spring, hey, for this requests or for this matchers, just authorize them. Otherwise, for example, it needs to be authenticated or permit all and so on. So this is what we will see together. So here first, let's do HTTP. Let's disable CSRF, and then let's say authorize requests. So here we can precise the requests we want to authorize or we don't want to authorize. Let's say here end matchers, and here we can have, or we can pass a list of patterns. So for our case, it will be /API/v star. I will explain this just right away. / let's say public /*. For this one, permit all. I want to permit all the access. So if a user wants to access this endpoint, there is no login required. And the rest, any request, so any other request different than this path, we need it should be authenticated. And here also, let's say form login. And .form login. So here I want to use a form login authentication, not a base authentication. I can explain the difference in a different tutorial. But okay, let me just resume and explain this here. Here, just we told Spring to disable the CSRF, and then now here we are configuring the authorized requests. So we told Spring here that if you get any matchers or any pattern that matches this, which is /API, because for our endpoints we will be calling them /API/v. The star is the version. It can be /v1, v2, v3, and so on. But to be consistent and generic, we can make it star. So here also the controller, we will create a control and we will call it, or we give it the request mapping public, and all the methods inside this controller should be accessible without authentication, because here we told Spring that permit all of this. So we can maybe make it like that to be easier for you, and this and this. Okay, then any request after this, any request, it should be authenticated, and then as I told you, or as mentioned, we need to use the form login. So this is the first thing. Now let's go ahead and create our first controller or public controller. Here let's create it in web or API or controllers, whatever naming you prefer for the packaging. So here I will create a first controller and I will call it public controller. So here we need the REST controller annotation to tell Spring this is our controller, and our request mapping, it will be /API/v1. For example, this is a good practice to always give a version to your endpoints or resources, and here /public. So now what we will do, we will create our first endpoint. It's a get mapping, let's give it / and here public string public endpoint, for example. Just call it whatever you want, and here we will be returning a simple string. So let's round it with an h1, hello from the public endpoint. Let's close this, and now we can start our application and see what will happen. So I will be starting the application. So now let's go ahead and test the application. So as we saw, the application is started on localhost 8080. So let's do this. Let's fix the typo. And here we see that we have the message that we just precised. Hello from the public endpoint. Now let's go back and create a new controller here. Controller. It will be the secured one. So let's call secured controller. Same thing goes here. It's a REST controller. And here let's give it the request mapping. As mentioned also in the previous controller, it will be /API/v1. Let's call it /secured. Just here, just to mention, this is a secured controller. So here I will be copying this. Okay, so this is a public endpoint. I will call this one, let's keep it like that, but this one will be secured, hello from the secured endpoint. This one, let's say this is an admin endpoint. This one, hello from the admin endpoint. This one is, let's say, user endpoint, and this one, let's call it admin user endpoint, like that. So, and here, let's say this one is going to be /admin, here /user, and here /admin user. So like that, we just created a secured endpoint or a secured resource, and this one we will just restart the application, and we will see that if we want to access this endpoint, will be refused, or we will have a 403, like access unauthorized or unauthorized access. So I will restart the application and test it again. Okay, so now the application restarted. Let's now try to check if we can access this secured endpoint. So as we can see here, we are fully redirected to the /login. As we mentioned here in the configuration of our security config, we said that we want to have a form login. So this is the form login provided by Spring, and here if I type, for example, something that doesn't exist and do sign in, it will tell me that the username and or password is incorrect, so there is no redirection. And here, as we configured it for admin that we sign in. So here we see that nothing happens. Let's go ahead and check our terminal if we have some exceptions or if we have something. So yeah, that's true, and that was intentional. So here it says that there is no password encoder mapped for the ID null and so on. So what does this mean? This means that we did not provide a password encoder for Spring to be used to encode or to compare the passwords. So what does this mean? The password encoder, let's imagine, for example, if we have a database stored users, and when we store a user in the database, we need to encode or to hash the password. So we need also to tell Spring that the same password encoder that we use to encode or to hash the password, so Spring will use it to decode and compare the passwords. So here it's the easiest fix. Let's just create or add a bean. Let's create public password encoder. And then let's just return no op password encoder.get instance. So this is nothing. Actually, this one we only use it for development testing or for development or for testing, but never use this on production environment. So this one, you can read the documentation about it. This is a no password encoder. That means it's just a class implementing the password encoder interface, and we can use it for testing purposes, for example. So let's go ahead and restart the application. Okay, so the application started. Let's go ahead and test again. So let's refresh the page, and here let's type admin, for example. Here we will have a 404 because we have no mapping for localhost /8080. But what we can do is we can do to the secured endpoint. And here we see that we have the hello from secured endpoint. And for example, if I try to access the admin, I see that I have the correct message I provided as a return. So let's also try the user and the admin user endpoint. So far, I think everything is fine, and I hope everything is clear for everyone. So next step is what we will do is we will secure or we will give authorization for each endpoint. So now imagine now we have this situation. We have a user with, let's just log out first. Let's do a logout. Yes, and now let's log in with user. So sign in, and this /API/secured. Now I'm logged in with user with role user, and here I want to access the endpoint admin. So with the user account, I can access the admin endpoint, and this is something that I want to prevent. So only users with admin role can access the /admin, and only users with access user can access the /user. For example, that means, for example, admins can access only the /admin, as we can see here in this controller. /admin, this is only accessible by admin users, here users, and this one can be accessed by both of them. Or if we talk about role hierarchy, admin can access all of this, but the user can access only these two endpoints. So that means if I log in with the user account, I should not access this admin endpoint. So now let's go ahead and implement this one. So this, we said it's accessible by anyone. For this one, we need to use an annotation called pre-authorize, and this pre-authorize, it takes a parameter which is the method name. It's called, we have like many methods, and the ones we will be using is the method has role or the has authority. Actually, later on, if you work or if you want to implement authorities, I mean authorities, for example, if a user can delete, add, remove, read, create, for example. So yeah, this is the authorization and the permissions. But for this tutorial or for this workshop, we will be talking only about roles. So for this admin, we have has role and we have the method has any role. So the has role, it's precise and the user should have only this single role. So if the user can be a user and admin, can be user and admin, that means the user should have this role and has any role. So any user with the role user and admin can access this endpoint. So here, let's say admin. So here there is one thing that's really worth mentioning. So here Spring will automatically add a prefix called admin. So you can change it later on, and as you can see here, in the code, we have this default role prefix, which is this one. So you don't need here to provide or to say role admin. Even if you do it, Spring will tell you that, hey, you don't Spring already provides this or already adds this prefix. So let's do the same here. Let's say, for example, as we proposed or we supposed at the beginning that the user is only accessible by users. And here, let's say, has any role admin or user. So now our endpoint or our endpoints are secured. Let's go ahead and restart the application and test it. Okay, now let's go and test. Now I will just need to refresh and I need to log in. Let's log with the user, and we said here, or we specified here, that the /admin should not be accessed by a user. But what we see here is when I put /admin, I can access the endpoint. So even if I refresh, let's try user, also I can access this one. So what happened? So what's happening exactly? Why this is not working? So if you face this kind of issue, there is something that we need to add. We need to tell Spring that we want to work with web security, like the method web security or web security methods. So what I mean with this, that we need to tell Spring, hey, I want to use this pre-authorized annotation. This is what I mean. So here, let's say enable global method security or enable method security. So you can also read about the difference between of them. In this case, let's just use the global method security. It will be enabled globally. And here we have an attribute that we need to enable, which is the pre-post enabled. That means we have a pre-post, or before doing or executing or accessing a specific endpoint, I want to execute this one. So let's restart and explain also things at the same time. So here we told Spring that, hey, I want to enable global method security. I want to check before accessing an endpoint. I want to check each user role or roles. So we see here now I logged in with the user role. So let's do it again. Log out. Now let's log in with user. and now I see if I want to access the secured, so the secured is fine. And if I want to access the admin, I get this 403. 403, that means it's forbidden. The access is forbidden because I don't have the permission or the authorization to access this endpoint. If I try to access the user, I can access user. And also if I try to access the admin user, also I can access it, because here in the secured controller, I said for this endpoint, admin user, it can like the user should has any role, admin or user role, to be able to access this endpoint. Now let's go ahead and start test it also with admin. So this one /API secured, and now if I access the /admin here, hello from admin endpoint, and as we specified here for the user role, it's only accessed by user having the role user. So now if I type user, I get also a 403. So this is what we wanted to implement in this workshop. So thank you guys for following so far and reaching this point of this tutorial. I'm really happy having you in this video. So also don't forget to share, subscribe, and invite your friends. Share this video with you. Also leave comments what you want me to teach you next time, or what other videos you want for the next times. Thank you so much guys. See you next time.